Tonight we have a special program. We're going to talk about managing teen stress. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome you all here and let you know too what other town hall meetings we have in store. This is our 6th town hall meeting. We have one more in April. April 26th, we'll be talking about opioids, what parents need to know. And on May 8th, we'll be talking about healthy relationships. And that will be Audra Johnson from the Shelter House. By show of hands, who here has read or gets the Youth Connection magazine? Excellent, then I don't even need to remind you about that. Tonight, we're talking about how to manage teen stress. And we know this is an issue in our community, and it's an issue all over our nation. And I think about a few kids that this is really impacting in school. And I know of one young lady who has a hard time going to school because of lunchtime. Has a lot of anxiety around that. And I know another young lady who stopped going to school and now is learning at home because, again, her anxiety is very strong. And if we can, as parents and as a community, learn how to surround our kids in support and do what we can to help them through their anxieties and to be resilient, that's what we're going to try to do. And it's not all girls. I had a son who played football, and once he was in college, he said, "Mom, did you know that before every game I threw up?" Well, I guess anxiety doesn't matter whether you're male or female. It's pretty prevalent, and tonight I look forward to hearing from Jennifer Lombardo on how we can identify it, as well as what we can do to help. Before we get started, I'm going to play a quick little video, and then I'll introduce Jennifer.
And we are back now with the kickoff of our special series, The Secret Lives of Teens. We're talking about some issues that teens commonly deal with, but also commonly hide from their parents. Maria Shriver is here. She's the parent of 4 children. One is still a teenager. Maria, good morning.
Good morning, Matt. Thanks so much. Well, we're kicking off this series with a big topic, anxiety. More and more kids are suffering from it. So we gathered a group of teens together to talk about anxiety, why they seem to have it, what we as parents can learn from it, how we contribute to it. Take a look. 15-year-old Anna Marie was a straight-A student.
I would always have trouble breathing when I was feeling anxious, and I'd kind of feel like my chest tighten.
17-year-old Jake was a popular athlete.
It's a lot of fleeting thoughts in my head, a lot of fear, but I don't really know what I'm afraid of.
Today, an estimated 1 in 10 teens experiences anxiety so severe that it disrupts their lives.
Everyone that I know has some form of anxiety. That's scary.
We went to Newport Academy, a behavioral treatment center, to talk to these high schoolers about the anxiety from parents, friends, and school. How many of you kept your anxiety a secret?
Well, for me, because that was definitely a big thing, was hiding it. So showing things like fear and sadness were almost taboo.
I didn't see any other people in my life struggling with anxiety, and so I never wanted to show anyone how anxious and stressed out I really was.
So many parents today are referred to as, quote, helicopter parents. They are, trying to get you the best SAT tutors. They're trying to get you after-school help. They're trying to get you to get a scholarship on a sports thing. You guys are all nodding. Is that causing anxiety?
Absolutely.
Yes.
From a really early age, I was exposed to the idea that if you don't get into a good college, you're not going to be successful in life. You're going to amount to nothing. And so I was really stressed out about getting good grades.
Another stressor, pretending online to be someone they weren't. Did social media exacerbate your anxiety?
On social media, I was a different person. I was having fun all the time. I was outgoing, when in reality I wasn't, and it was causing me a lot of anxiety to keep that up.
Experts say while some anxiety in teens is normal, there are warning signs it's become a problem.
Probably the biggest issue is one of avoidance. So teens that are anxious tend to avoid things that they find frightening. And this can be going to school, this can be social relationships, not going to work.
To numb themselves, some teens secretly use alcohol or drugs.
I started to lead a double life. I mean, it was basically wake up in the morning, like, you know, get dressed and everything, be really nice to my mom. I love you, Mom, and she drops me off, and then I walk onto school and I'm known there as the stoner kid.
And your mother had no idea that when you got out of that car and said, I love you, Mom, that you were a druggie in school?
She had no idea, no.
Others turn to self-harming behavior, like cutting. One survey shows nearly 1 in 5 college students have tried it. Explain that to me. I'm a mom. It's hard for me to understand how cutting yourself actually helps.
It kind of took my mind away from the emotional pain, and I would completely forget about everything that I was dealing with because, like, something else hurt.
Through treatment here, these teens say they've learned healthier ways to cope.
And a big cause of my anxiety was the fear of the unknown, the fear of what might happen. And so one thing that really helps me is just trying to stay in the moment.
The biggest tool for me is probably honesty. Honesty with myself for where I'm really at, and honesty like with the people that are here to help.
There's me in the hospital.
So experts say honesty is the key. We have to encourage our children to talk to us about what they're feeling, what they're going through. And I know, Matt, that's not always easy.
No, I have a 13-year-old boy, and when you say encourage them to talk, I think boys are more reluctant to talk about some of these issues than girls are.
They are, but get them in the car, drive with them, they talk more. At least that's what I've discovered. But we are going to talk actually about boys and what seems to be happening a lot with internet addiction and boys. So that'll be tomorrow.
Maria Shriver, thank you very much.
I love Maria Shriver. I love that she says, if you get your son in your car and they'll talk then, and that really helped with us as well. Tonight I have the honor of introducing Jennifer Lombardo, and she is from Partners in Change. She has a doctorate in psychology from Central Michigan University. She's been at Partners in Change for 11 years. She works predominantly with older teens and adults, and she's trained to see a variety of disorders, depression, anger, relationship, marital, and trauma. Her primary interest is working with anxiety and OCD. So here is Jennifer Lombardo.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I want to thank the Legacy Center for having me here tonight, and I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight. So hopefully we can have you guys also give some ideas of how we can help our teens, and not just teens. What I'm going to present tonight, you can also apply if you have younger kids. This stuff you can apply to your younger kids as well. And the stuff I present tonight, if you're struggling with anxiety and stress, all these techniques, everything I talk about, you know, we do the same thing with adults. The difference in what we teach teens versus adults versus the kids, it's just all about presentation. You can't talk to a 6-year-old the way you talk to a 44-year-old. So to start with, one of the things I really like about stress and anxiety is it's very relatable for most of us. So by a show of hands, who here has experienced stress? Exactly, right? If you didn't raise your hand, I'd probably scratch my head a little bit. Who here, by a show of hands, has experienced anxiety? Maybe not debilitating. I don't even have to ask. All right, yep. It's common. Sometimes it's not debilitating. It's fleeting. It kind of comes and then it goes, and we go on and we're fine. And then obviously, sometimes it becomes more problematic. It becomes more chronic. And then that's when we start getting worried, especially about our kids. So if I can figure out how to work this here. So most of us will use stress and anxiety interchangeably. But if you read about it, research will differentiate between the two. So I kind of made this slide just kind of an FYI, but you don't really need to worry about differentiating between the two. So stress is actually just that, generally a physical reaction to a specific situation in which there is a danger present. The danger does not have to be a real danger. It can be a perceived threat. So it can be just something you think is dangerous. Public speaking is a great example of that, right? And your teens can all relate to this because they have presentations to do. So you can experience stress at work for performance reasons. You can experience at home when you're trying to get along with your kids and your spouses. It's often seen just as kind of a pressure in your life. Common symptoms of stress, again, pretty much all physical. It's that fight or flight response that we get. Headaches, loss of sleep, high blood pressure, chest pain, heart palpitations, stuff like that. When we talk about anxiety, you're going to see a lot of the exact same things when we talk about the anxiety response. So anxiety then is just our reaction to the stress, and it can be our reaction to the stress before the stressor occurs. It can be the reaction to the stress as it's occurring. It can be our reaction to the stress after it. So if I use this example right here with public speaking, the stressor is right now being in here. You know, my heart's beating a little bit faster, I can feel I'm kind of shaking a little bit, that's my stress response going on. The anxiety then was, I won't even tell you all this stuff before here, when I was having those feelings of panic of, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I want to run away, I'm going to make a fool of myself, what if I trip over, what if I can't talk, what if I forget everything I've ever learned, all those wonderful helpful thoughts, right? That's the anxiety before the stressor. The anxiety after the stressor, so I'll walk away from here and my stress response will disappear, right? The stressor is gone, I'm going to feel this wave of relief, and then the anxiety will kick in, right? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. Nobody laughed at me. Oh my goodness. What are they thinking? Have I completely made a fool of myself and my employer in front of all these people? So that's the difference. Now, how we cope with it, like I said, this was just kind of FYI. How we cope with it is pretty much the same. You want to target it from different areas, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So what causes teen stress? I have my own list here, and then you guys can feel free to add to it. Families can cause stress. Some of it is just living together. You live with people long enough, there's going to be some conflict, there's going to be some stress in those relationships. Sometimes as adults we do things that cause further stress that we don't mean, especially with teenagers, so adult conversations. So, you know, they're a teenager. We want them to learn about life. We want to prepare them for things. Sometimes we say a little bit too much. So a big one that sometimes teens sometimes overhear. So teenagers are really good, right, at kind of hearing things that you think you're really doing in secret. So they hear things about financial problems or marital problems, or other things that they really don't need to be thinking about right now, worrying about. Talking poorly about others. This can include talking poorly about peers in general, people in general, their friends, teachers, coaches. One, I just don't think it's a really good example for us to be setting to our kids to criticize others. But two, what if they really like the teacher you're criticizing? Now you're putting them in this really weird spot of, well, this is what mom's saying, but I really like them. And your teen might not really know what to do with that kind of stress. Siblings, I don't know how many of you have multiple children, but yep. So we all know how siblings can cause stress to each other and torment each other. Parental expectations is another big one. A lot of us have high standards for our kids, and it can be a really hard thing to determine at what point the high standard is an appropriate high standard and what point we're maybe crossing that line and setting our standards for our kids a little bit too high. Academics, I think we all know about this one. Tests, quizzes, you know, for teenagers going into college, SATs, college applications, college interviews. Those are all big stressors for kids. I added some things from the videos. They were talking about getting the best, right? Getting the best tutor, getting the best grades, getting into the best school. Social is another big one, just trying to fit in. Social media is a newer one that probably most of us did not have to deal with when we were growing up. And now it's, you know, it's an integral part of our teenagers' lives. And again, in the video, they mentioned pretending to be somebody they're not is a stressor. There's bullying, there's the shaming, there's the judgment. And again, it's just another forum where our kids are trying to fit in and feel like they belong. And then upward comparisons. So this is your teenager always looking at somebody and thinking, they're doing it better than me. They're getting the better grades, they look better, they have the better house, they're better than me at basketball. So a lot of times teenagers are constantly, instead of just saying, I'm good enough and I'm doing the best I can, they're always kind of looking up and making those comparisons and putting stress on themselves to be better instead of just being happy with, you know, who they are and what they're doing. Our physical being and our biology puts stress on us. I have 2 younger kids. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they're both boys. So I hear by the teenage years I'm going to be lucky, especially when it comes to puberty and hormones. I've heard stories that girls are really, really stressful at that age. So I don't know if that's true or not. I won't ever have to find out, luckily. Yeah, any problems with my boys, I already told my husband, it's all on you. So, so hormones, right? The teen, their body is just going through changes, and that can just be rough on them right there. And then, of course, if your kid is unlucky enough to have any health problems, whether it's just small ones, so they get a really bad cold, or they get strep throat, or they get the flu, and then they're out of school for a week, and then they get all stressed out about that. Or if you have a kid who has some chronic health problems, that creates a whole nother level of stress for them. Environmental, doing too much can stress kids out. Doing too little, boredom is actually a stressor. Most people do not know that, but boredom for most of us is very stressful for us. We don't know what to do with ourselves. And then we get into more serious stuff, trauma, and unfortunately in this day and age, this has been very salient lately, gun violence and deaths. There's a lot of talk about that. That's another stressor that probably most of us going to school did not have to deal with. What was it, 2 weeks ago, Midland Public Schools went on lockdown? Yeah, that was, even for me, that was just unheard of. The worst thing we ever did was a fire drill, and that was always exciting because we got out of class, right? Because we knew it was just a drill, whatever. So there's some very serious things that our kids have to deal with now. And then there's stressors that are sometimes positive things. So a big change in the family, the addition of a brother or sister. So mom has another baby, dad gets a new job, mom gets a new job, and now the family is moving either to the other side of town or to a new state. A lot of times these are good things, but they're still stress. They put stress on our minds and our bodies. And then there's the stress we put on ourselves. So underlying thoughts and emotional patterns. So feeling like a failure, feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like you don't belong, feeling like you're not worthwhile. A lot of times kids just don't know how to manage their emotions. They know they're feeling stuff, but they're not quite sure what to do with it. So all that puts stress. So what else? What else have I missed that causes your kids stress? Oh, is that comprehensive? Wow.
The parental expectation, that's an interesting one, because my oldest is 27, and I would always tell them when they were younger, do your best, if this is the best you can do.
Yeah.
But if it's not, then, you really need to do, like if you get a C because you didn't do your homework, well, was that your best? And it's funny to listen to him talk, because now he remembers that I said you had to get A's all the time.
No, that's very true. What we say and what our kids hear are two different things. Yeah, yep. And you can do things, and that's where part of this, you guys can do everything, I'm going to put this in quotes, right? You can do everything right. I don't know exactly what that is, but you can do everything right, and your kids, because of how their own brains work and how they process things and the thinking patterns they develop, they can hear different things, and they can still just struggle no matter what you do. So, yeah, that's a really good example, though, right? So causes of anxiety. So when you start moving away from just stressors that hopefully are kind of here, there, and in between, your teen works through them, and then they go away. If your teen is starting to develop something serious than just dealing with stresses here and there and starts having anxiety or more prolonged anxiety, there can be lots of different reasons. So I broke it down here. There's long-term causes, so things that your child's just kind of set up to be sensitive to stress and predisposed to develop anxiety. And the big one here is just their heredity. We know that a lot of kids who have significant anxiety probably have one parent who also has some significant anxiety. And it'll be interesting because we'll work with the kids and the parents will be like, oh, no, neither one of us has any anxiety. And then we start actually working with the parents and we're like, yeah, you just didn't realize you had anxiety, but it's there. That's always a good conversation with parents too, right? So sometimes our kids are just pre-programmed for You know, it runs in families. Sometimes it doesn't run in families. We had those families where there's not a strong history in the family, and the kid, just for whatever reason, that's how their brain got wired. So there's just sometimes those temperamental issues, those sensitivities that the kid comes with. So you can often see this at an early age. They might be really picky about their clothing. So it's like, oh, I can only wear those really soft pants. Anything else is too scratchy. Or they complain about the tags. You know, bless those clothing manufacturer who decided to just eliminate tags in shirts, right? Or their exaggerated responses, right? And I have my 7-year-old's on the anxious side, so I use him a lot. So he's not hungry, he's starving. And he's not just cold, it's like, Mom, it's so freezing here, I'm so cold. So everything's just a little bit exaggerated, a little bit bigger than it really probably needs to be. And maybe some of that's the age, but some of it is definitely temperament. Childhood circumstances can be a predisposing cause. So you can have that sensitive temperament and never develop significant anxiety. You cannot have that sensitive temperament, but as parents or people in the environment, we can model it for our children and they can learn it, which is actually kind of scary. So we can model it. Parents who are super critical of their kids can start to predispose their kids to anxiety and induce it. We're back to those excessively high standards again. And then emotional insecurity and dependence. So promoting an environment where your kid doesn't feel like they can feel their emotions, express their emotions, or they become overly dependent on their parents to do things for them. All of that will foster a greater likelihood that the kid might develop anxiety. And then cumulative stress. So stress here, stress there, stress here. You know, we all deal with that. Kids who have just stress after stress after stress, or they have one huge stressor that just is prolonged in their life, they're going to be at greater risk for anxiety as well. So those are the long-term causes, and then there's the short-term causes, things that might trigger the anxiety to actually start showing itself more. Stressors again pop up, right? That's probably why we use stress and anxiety interchangeably, because they go hand in hand. And then there's other things like conditioning that the kids can learn. And that's best shown by phobias, things like phobias and OCD. So my 3-year-old loved my neighbor's cat, but it's not the nicest cat in the world. So, you gotta pet him gently. Oh, he doesn't want to be pet anymore. Well, one day I wasn't watching him close enough, and he pet the cat, and he missed the cue, and the cat scratched him. And, he doesn't like that cat anymore. So that's a great example of conditioning where kids can learn a fear response. And now my poor little kid, he sees that cat, and the cat might be in the driveway next door, and he'll be like, Mommy, the cat's here, you gotta get rid of the cat. So now we have to uncondition him so he's not so scared. And then there's the maintaining causes. So however it develops, what tends to happen is how we deal with it, we'll maintain it. Avoidance, you heard that in the video, it's kind of the hallmark of anxiety. When somebody's suffering with significant anxiety, I have yet to see somebody not doing avoidance behaviors. Anxious self-talk, I gave a good example of that earlier when I was describing my own anxious thoughts about the presentation. And then there's mistaken beliefs. So our thinking starts to get a little bit skewed. And kind of the hallmarks with anxiety, the skewed thinking, is we start making assumptions. So we assume we know what other people are thinking, we assume what they're feeling, we maybe start projecting. So if I feel like I did a bad job, I might go home and tell my husband, oh my gosh, everybody there thought I did terrible. So that's making assumptions about what all of you are thinking. Overestimation of probability. This is where you assume something is more likely to happen than it is. So flying is a really great example of that. For kids, maybe tests. So if you got a kid who generally does well in school and they're anxious, they might tell you, oh Mom, I'm gonna fail that test. I just know it. And this kid has never failed a test in his life, right? So maybe, I don't know, it happens, but your child is probably overestimating the probability that that's going to happen. And my other favorite one is catastrophic thinking, catastrophizing, as I like to call it. You may also hear it in other terms, making a mountain out of molehills, and don't cry over spilled milk. You guys have probably all heard that one. By the way, if you say those to your kids, they'll stare at you. They don't know those terms anymore. But again, that's a hallmark of anxiety. Everything you assume it's going to be a lot worse than it probably will be. Other things, withheld feelings. So they were talking about that again in the video where, they stuff it, they don't express it, they try to avoid it, they pretend it's not happening. Not being assertive and getting their needs met, not doing enough self-care, then the physical stuff, muscle tension, and then again we come back to that high stress lifestyle. Any questions about those? Nothing? So inevitably, when I'm talking about anxiety, people ask me, at what point is this normal teenage anxiety, right? Because we all raised our hands when I asked, have we experienced stress? Have we experienced anxiety? We've all raised our hands. That does not mean every one of us in this room will have had an anxiety disorder in our lifetime, or even if we don't meet anxiety, it doesn't mean we've all had significant problems with an anxiety. So at what point is it kind of just normal? It's what we go through in life, we work through it, we move on, and at what point is it, for lack of a better word, abnormal, and we need to really be concerned about it, really need to be concerned for our kids. The first thing you want to look at is developmental stage. Separation anxiety is a great example of this. So between the ages of about a year, 18 months, separation anxiety is very, very common. And unless it's extreme, pretty much what you tell parents is, it'll be okay, right? If you have a 15-year-old who doesn't want to join groups unless you're part of it, they don't want to go to bed without you near them, or they don't ever want you to leave the house, or if you do, they experience a lot of distress because they're afraid something bad is going to happen to you. That's again forms of separation anxiety, but now at 15, that is not appropriate for the developmental stage, and if it's debilitating, that's probably going to be a cause of concern. So you have to look at what stage your child is in. The biggest one we like to use is functional impairment. So how much is it impairing your child's ability to go about and live their normal life? So you can look at this in relationships, and you can look at this, well, especially with teens, you look at it in academics. Adults might look at it in work performance. That's kind of the corollary to school. And as they were talking about in the video, teens might not want to talk to you, and so you got to find something to look for to try to figure out if something's going on. So looking for impairment or looking for behavior change. So if you have a kid who's normally doing one thing and they're going along doing that thing and then suddenly that behavior change, that may be fine, but it might be a red flag for you to just take a look at what's going on and make sure you're not missing anything. And as the video said, unfortunately, anxiety disorders are very common through not just adolescence, but childhood and adolescence. Prevalence rates are 10% to 20%, and it just gets worse into adulthood. Lifetime prevalence rates are, I think it's either 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 for adults to report having significant debilitating anxiety at some point in their lifetime. So it's a problem in our society. And the good news is we know how to treat it. Anxiety is one of our most treatable things that we do. The interventions for it, none of this is rocket science, right? I'm going to tell you guys all this and you're going to be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It can be very hard to implement, which is why I have a job. But we know how to treat this. So even if your child's just struggling through isolated events, there's things you can help them with. And the exact same things I would tell you to do during those isolated events are the same things I'm going to tell you to do if your child has more debilitating anxiety. So I have to do a little setup so that you're going to understand why I tell you to do what I tell you to do. Otherwise, it might not make sense. So this is just examples of how teenagers might express their stress and anxiety. But instead of me reading off the slide, do you guys have examples? What do your teenagers do when they're stressed or when they're anxious?
Drama.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that catastrophic stuff, right? Everything's terrible and their life is about to end. Oh, yeah. I've heard that one too already. You're the worst mom in the world, aren't you? I'm in competition with you because I've got that one down. Yeah, what else?
Sometimes get teary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they cry. Yep. Girls, and I don't know, do boys do that as much as girls? Yeah? All right. Okay. What else?
They can't sleep.
Yep, so those physical functions, right? They can't sleep, maybe they lose their appetite. Yep. What else?
With that migraines.
Oh, you have kids with migraines? I'm so sorry. Yeah. Yeah, that's, yeah. Yeah, and not migraines, maybe just headaches or just general, ooh, I just don't feel well. Yep. Anything else? So, yep, so we touched on a lot of those. There's the somatic complaints, so the headaches and the not sleeping. We've been through the thoughts already. Things you might hear your kids say is just vague stuff, like, I don't want to do this, I can't do this. You know, the catastrophic stuff, this is terrible. Or you might hear more specifics. I don't want people to laugh at me, I might make a mistake. And then the behavior again, avoidance and withdrawal. That's kind of the hallmarks. But sometimes, I don't know if any of you have oppositional children or a very strong-willed child, sometimes that's just their thing, right? Sometimes that's just what they're doing. Sometimes though a child, instead of dealing directly with the anxious behavior, they find it easier to have an external outlet and they deal with it through opposition and defiance. So sometimes what we have found that kids that come in with their parents saying, he just won't listen to what I do, when we really figure out what's going on, it's because the kid's really anxious and that's just their way of avoidance, really. So if they're anxious about school, they just start refusing to go to school. And the parents think that they're just being, you know, really obnoxious, but really the kid is just genuinely scared. So yeah, there's the school refusal right underneath there. Poor school performance, and then the video touched on more extremes of how teenagers start to express their stress and anxiety. You get into those self-harm behaviors, which as parents we're all very scared of, and then substance abuse as well. All right, so what do we do? I don't know how much you guys have read anything about treatment for stress and anxiety, but one of the most commonly used methods, it's tried and true, it's one of the most well-researched methods, is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And the model is really simple, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy says that your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors interact. Yeah, you guys are all nodding. You're like, yeah, of course. So if I'm happy, my thoughts tend to be positive. I have confidence in myself, and I'm ready to meet the world. So my behavior is non-avoidant. I jump right in, I do it. Life is great. If I'm anxious, my thoughts tend to be much more negative, catastrophic. I start making assumptions, and my behavior is some form of avoidance. So maybe I can just get out of doing this. So the idea is, if we could just change our feelings directly, again, that would be fantastic. But you guys all know, if you've ever been anxious or depressed or sad, not even on a clinical level, it's not easy to just snap out of it, right? You know, if you're having a bad day, you can't just, well, I've had some people say they can, and I give them thumbs up and I say go for it. But for the rest of us, we can't just say, I'm gonna be happy, and I'm just gonna snap out of this. It just doesn't work that way. So if you're telling your kids things like that, that's the first thing I'll tell you not to do, right? Don't invalidate what they're feeling. If they're feeling scared, if they're feeling sad, if they're feeling depressed, it's what they're feeling. You may be right, you know, so my 3-year-old's afraid of that cat now, and there's really no reason for him to be that scared of the cat. It's not gonna come and attack him. But it's what he's feeling, so I'm not gonna tell him there's no reason to be scared of that. We're gonna help him work through it in a different way. So the idea then behind cognitive behavioral therapy, sorry, I got off on a tangent. If we can't directly change the emotion, the only way I know how to do that is through medication, and we'll talk about that. If you change the way you're thinking about things, if you change the way you're behaving, and again, you guys have probably tried this stuff already with your kids, because this is for a lot of parents the most natural response. You help your kid think differently, you help them do things differently, that emotion should follow and their anxiety should decrease. So that's what that is. So going back to that one slide I had thrown up there, I just put it up there so you could see where the points of intervention can occur. So if there's predisposing causes, we can look in the environment, we can do work with parents directly, so all of us here tonight can take a good look at what we do and what we don't do and how we can maybe help our kids better. That's a point of intervention. Stress is another point of intervention. Are there ways we can eliminate or reduce stressors in our kids' lives? And then the other ones, and I put B's and T's by it so you can see the CBT model there. They're points of intervention, either changing the behavior or changing the thought. All right, so more concrete ideas for you. The first one is all about you guys and learning how to manage your own behavior. Whoops. Ooh. All right. Thank you. Otherwise, I would have kept going for a long time. So my first and my favorite one is don't be a pain thief. I think all of us as parents, and I don't know if this is more true for moms than for dads, we don't want our kids to have to feel any pain, right? We want to put them in their little bubble. We want to hug them, and we want to just keep them nice and safe so that they don't have to ever feel any pain. Unfortunately, and I'll probably say this multiple times, pain is inevitable in this world. We go through pain. We lose a loved one. We don't do as well as we would like. We fight with our brother. We fight with our parents. You know, there's going to be pain in our life. So one of the first things we can do as parents is to not be a pain thief. Don't try to steal that pain from your kid. Instead, help them work through the pain. A lot of what we're seeing, at least in our clinic, are kids coming through and they just have no idea what to do with pain. They know they feel bad, but for so long they've just, not necessarily the parents have done it, but sometimes kids are just great avoiders, right? They've managed to avoid actually learning how to work with pain, and they just don't know what to do at a certain point. We want to help our kids learn how to do that. It's a lifelong skill. It will help them in the long run. So even though it's hard to see our kids in pain, sometimes it's hard to see them suffer, it's sometimes what they need just to be able to work in this world. Transfer of control. If we model good, there's that one down there too, modeling how. So if we can control our own stress and anxiety, our kids will do a much better job, hopefully, with theirs. And I don't know if I should share this. I have a great example of that, and it's of me doing a really bad job of this. So I don't like being late, right? So I like to be on time, so I want my kids to be on time for school, right? I think that's something they should learn, that being on time is a good thing. So this was probably last year. We were running behind, and I don't remember why, but I did not do a good job of managing my stress and anxiety. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna be late, this is terrible. Yeah, see, I told you I don't know if I should share this. And I was just going on and on and on. We gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go. And I watched, I could see it on my poor little boy's face. That panic started to come into his face. And he probably didn't care about 10 minutes earlier, which is probably why I was mad and telling him we had to go. But you could see it on his face. And then he started mimicking me, right? So this was not my proudest mom moment. And he was suddenly worried about being late. So that's a really great example of both modeling and that transfer of control, where he was seeing me not being in control of my stress, and he was then losing control of his own emotions as well. So instead, a better thing would be to do, if you're running late like that, is to stay calm about it and get out the door as fast as you can, and model the idea, if we're late, I guess we're going to be late. Nothing catastrophic is going to happen. We'll just be late, and we'll just try to fix whatever happened today so that we're not late tomorrow, right? The video mentioned, the next one, we are not helicopters, no hovering allowed, right? And I think part of that, again, is just our desire as parents to help our kids be the best and do the best and not have any pain. So we kind of micromanage them a little bit too much to help them avoid that. But what it does is it sends inadvertently, right? We do this with good intentions. But it sends the message that we don't trust them, and that we don't believe that they're capable, and that we don't believe they're competent. And so if we start sending them that subtle message, what eventually happens over time for a lot of kids is they internalize that, and they develop that little voice in their head that says, I can't be trusted, I'm not competent, I'm not capable, and that can feed into stress and then anxiety. So modeling, covered that. Avoiding, this is what I do want you to avoid. Avoid catering to the anxiety. So if you have a kid who's refusing to go to school because they're anxious, this is in general. There are situations where, yes, at some point, sometimes the the best idea is to pull them out of school and do an alternative like homeschooling or something else. But if you're not at that point yet, you want to, instead of helping them avoid school, you want to help them learn how to encounter whatever's making them anxious at school and help them learn how to work through that anxiety. So in the cat example, every time my son sees that cat, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, let's get rid of the cat, let's get rid of the cat. I want to teach him that the cat can be there and just maybe don't pet the cat and you'll be just fine. So try not to cater to it. It prolongs the anxiety and it can make it worse over time. Don't overreact to their anxiety. You guys can probably see how that just feeds right into it. If they're already catastrophizing and then you catastrophize about them catastrophizing, this is terrible, why are you talking like this? Why are you being so dramatic? And you get yourself all worked up, now you guys are both anxious and it just turns into a real mess. So try to avoid doing that and try to avoid reacting with anger. And that's just a general, I know we all do it. It just, kids can be very, very frustrating, right? And I think a lot of us get angry when we feel like we are failing as a parent. We have tried all these things and we're working really hard and it's just not working. And when we start to feel bad that maybe we're not doing this or we can't do this, I think a lot of times for us that's where that anger comes. But reacting with anger just isn't going to help the situation. Avoid punishing the anxious behavior. So punishing a teen for being anxious isn't going to help them be less anxious. It's all about skill building. It's all about developing those skills. Punishment tells a kid what not to do. It does not teach a kid what they should do. So that's why punishment won't work here, because you want to teach the kids what they should do. And then the punishment can eventually lead to other problems like depression or defiant behavior. And so there's a technique we use at my clinic called collaborative problem solving. And I'll give you a little bit of a idea of what it is, and then there's resources at the end if you want to look it up and read more. That can be a really good way to help figure out what to do about the anxious situation with your teen. You can punish how a kid handles the anxiety. So if your kid is anxious at something and they are screaming at you and they are yelling at you and they're calling you names, that is not anxiety. That is something completely different. You can totally punish them for being out of control and disrespectful to you. So there's a difference. And then have a good life, right? Model to your kids that life is full of different things. It does not just revolve around them, although I know teenagers, that's part of their developmental stage. They're egocentric, the whole world revolves around them. Show them that life contains a variety of facets, and it's developing that balance of facets that generally makes us happy. So that, you know, there's the work, there's the home, there's friends, there's leisure activities. That way when one thing in one area goes a little bit bad, hopefully everything else in the other areas are going well, and it can be a buffer against both stress and anxiety. So that's a great way to model to your kids. Plus, it helps them to know they're not under a microscope. If they're not the center of your world, they don't feel like you're always just kind of watching them and wondering what they're doing. Any questions about that? No? Okay. All right, so that's all stuff you can do. Now, if your teen will let you, there's things that you can actually do with your teen. And there's even, I think I put them in the resources at the end. If not, you guys can Google it. There's tons of workbooks that if your teen's willing, they can just do a workbook and it'll teach them all the same types of things I'm talking about here. But if you don't want to do a workbook and your teen is somebody who will actually talk to you and problem solve with you and work with you on things, these are things that you can do with them. And I have heard that car example from more than one parent, that you put a kid in the car, especially if you put kids in the car in the back seat with some friends, and you can hear a lot and you can learn a lot. That's true. I see lots of nods.
They don't think you can hear anything I said. They don't.
That's a great assumption. I think I'm going to enjoy that one. Yeah. So medication for stress, we generally don't want to do, because hopefully the stress is just something that it's there, it'll resolve, you know, it's done and over with. So medication doesn't really make sense. Medication for anxiety, you get different views on it. My personal viewpoint is there's a time and place for medication. It wouldn't necessarily be my first choice. So if a kid's anxious and they're coming in, you know, their brains are still developing, There's bad side effects with medications. We've all heard those horror stories, right, about some of the things medications can do. So it's not necessarily a first choice, but sometimes you're at a point with a kid where they're just not functioning. And to even get them to do any of the stuff that I'm going to tell you, there's just no way they're going to do it. They're just too overwhelmed. It's just too much. And so sometimes medication is warranted to, I call it take the edge off, right? Just bring them down a little bit to where their emotions are more manageable, and then they can start engaging in these skills. But the other reason we try to avoid medication is a lot of times if it works really, really super well, which is great, right? But it takes all of that pain away, and it takes all of the anxiety away, and then they never learn any of these skills of how to manage their pain. So again, there's no hard and fast rule as to whether or not if your kid is really suffering from anxiety that you should or shouldn't use medication, but you'd really want to weigh the pros and cons of what you need your kid to learn and how severe it is and what's the best route for you. And I have a lot of, adults too, that they'll use medication to take that edge off. And then once they're feeling better, they can use the skills better, they wean off, and then they just do it on their own. So one thing you can do with your kids is give them examples of how to work through stress and anxiety. And again, I don't know how much your kids will talk to you. Sometimes this works better if they're a little bit younger, before you stop knowing anything. So you can use fictional or non-fictional stories. So I always like to give my kids examples, right? Well, my eldest anyway. My 3-year-old doesn't know what's going on. But my eldest I could talk about with, so I gave a presentation like this last year. We were driving by the church where the presentation was, and I just told her, I was like, wow, Mommy's gonna have to speak in front of all these people. I'm starting to really kind of get worried about that and wonder what's gonna happen. And I was like, what do you think about that? And, wonderful kids. I love kids. He's like, Mom, that's stupid. He's like, why would you be worried about that? You're just talking to people. So I was like, that's really pretty true. You did a great job challenging my catastrophic thinking. So, if you have a kid like that where you can actually have an honest conversation, a healthy conversation, that can be really good. Teens, not so much. I don't know how much books they make for teens like this, but again, younger kids, I kept this in because some of you might have younger kids where they make books, right, that will actually walk kids through this thing. My 7-year-old brought home a book last week called The Worry Warts, right, and it went through each of these 3 friends. They each had a catastrophic worry, and they helped each other decide why it wasn't so bad. And I would ask them, right, I'm a therapist, so what do you think of those worries? And he gave me the same response he did last year to me. It's like, that's stupid. Why would anybody think that way? He is anxious, by the way. So I really had fun hearing him say that one. He does the same thing with other stuff. So that's challenging your thinking. So when your kid's thinking catastrophically, oh my gosh, I'm nervous about this test. What happens if I get a bad grade on this test? If I get a bad grade, then I might fail the class. And if I fail the class, then I might might not be able to get into college, and if I can't get into college, I'll never get a job, and if I don't get a job, I'll never be able to make money, and my life will be a complete misery. Wow. Poor kid. Right? But that's what we do. That's that catastrophic thinking. We take it and we just run with it. So if you have a kid who will talk with you, help them challenge that. And you can challenge that at any line of that thinking. The very first thought is a great place to start if they'll go there with you. How likely is it that you are going to fail this test? And maybe it's a hard subject, and maybe they haven't studied, and maybe there's a good likelihood that they might fail this test. Okay, move on to the next lesson. Okay, you might fail this test. Is that really going to be a terrible thing? Are you really going to fail the class? I don't know, maybe. Maybe you problem solve there. You say, well, what can you do if you do poorly on this test? Can you go to the teacher? Can you talk to them about how you could make this up and get a better grade? So you just help them challenge it, maybe help them problem solve the situation instead of engaging in this pointless worry that it's just unhelpful. Does that make sense? Like I said, you guys probably naturally, most of my parents just naturally do this.
Okay, so what if it's not about schoolwork, but what about like how friends perceive you? Because I see like teaching middle schoolers that's a lot of times there's kids that worry about the grade stuff, and then there's the kids that worry about the social.
All the social, yeah. So what kinds of things? Like, do they like me, or what do they think of me?
Yeah.
Do they think I'm ugly? I don't.
Sure.
I'm not to that stage
Any
yet,
of that
so.
stuff, yeah. Nobody
Yeah.
likes me.
Yeah, that belonging thing, right? That's a hard one because it might be true. That person might, if they're worried that a person might not like them, it very well might be true. So that's where you have to find a balance between challenging how likely it is if it's appropriate, or maybe just kind of helping them understand that not everybody in the world is going to like them and that's okay. So sometimes just a little education about just that's normal in life and that's okay. Maybe helping them to, and this is hard in middle school, right? Did you say you teach middle schoolers? Yeah. Thank you. No, seriously, thank you. Oh, do you?
It's great, but I mean, I remember being that way. It makes you remember how it was back then, how irrational it was.
Yeah, yep. And this idea that they're supposed to learn at such a young age that who they are is just fine. And as adults, we struggle with that, right? And we want our teenagers to think like that. So sometimes you can challenge it. Sometimes you can maybe help them connect with that person and maybe just get some direct feedback. You have to be careful, right? Because then you have to know how that other person would respond. And then sometimes it's just helping them go through the pain of sometimes people don't like us. And how do you deal with that? How do you cope with that? How do you walk forward from that? Look at all these other people who like you. So, does that answer your question? Kind of vaguely. Yeah. It's hard.
Sometimes you get the like everybody, but everybody has this or everybody's done that. And I've been told to just ask, who is everybody? Mm-hmm. And when they stop and think, everybody is like a couple people, really.
Yeah, no, that's challenging that thinking, right? Make them be concrete. Yep.
Who is everybody?
I've done something similar with my son, who's almost 17, when he comes back with, well, so-and-so's mom doesn't make him go to bed at 9:30. I'm like, you know why that is? This is what I'll tell him. Do you know why that is? And he'll say, why? And I say, because I'm not their mom. I'm your mom, and you have to go to bed at 9:30. And here's why you have to go to bed at 9:30, because your body is growing, and you don't realize it, but sleep is the most restorative time for your body.
Yeah.
So I'm doing this for your own good, and one day you'll thank me, even if it's not today.
No, it's a great life lesson, right? Life is not fair. You have to go to bed at 9:30. Your friend over here could stay up till 3:30 in the morning. It's the sooner they learn that life lesson, the better they're going to be, right? Because we all know it doesn't stop. It does not stop. Yep, that's a great idea.
And just a question on what if the stressor is something that's not going to go away, like a terminally ill parent, or something where that stressor's there all the time, and then they're hypersensitive to all those other things.
Yeah.
So how do you help manage? You know what the main stress is.
Yeah.
How do you work them through something like that? I mean, is that more of a? And I've asked them, do you want to go talk to somebody?
No. Yeah, I'm the worst person in the world. I was serious about that.
So I'm like, seriously, don't want to talk about it. So how do you help them realize that it's going to be okay somehow? I mean, what's the best? Try humor. You can't really make that humorous. Things like that.
Wait, I don't know how you make a terminally ill person humorous. But
problem solving. No.
Well, that one is about, and on my way over here, I was thinking about this, and the one slide I missed, I think I have it eventually, like a blurb on it. It's just learning how to sit with pain. And if you have a terminally ill parent or a chronic stressor of any sort, that's part of what you need to learn, is the fact that there's just going to be a little bit of pain there. You have a choice. You can find that balance between encountering it and working through it and dealing with the thoughts and the emotions that will come, and then setting it aside and living the rest of your life. And that, I don't wish that on adults, right? For kids to have to do that. So there's a component, and we use actually at our clinic mindfulness. You guys have probably heard of that. It's a good buzzword these last 5 years. But mindfulness is all about learning how to be in the moment and accept whatever's coming to you in that moment without judging it and not being scared of it, right? And probably that's more the approach than that you go there where you teach them how.
So when I say it's just the way it is, I'm sorry that's the way that's okay, because I don't have an answer some days,
Yeah. What are you supposed to tell them?
Well, that was my question.
No, I don't have an answer. Yeah, no, it's kind of like the other life lesson we were just talking over there, that life's not fair. Sometimes there's nothing you can do.
Everybody's going on a cruise, and everybody's going to Mexico, and we are not.
Yeah. Well, if you want, we can write down names here of people who are not going to Mexico, and then you can give it to your kid. Like, I was at a meeting today, and these people are not going. Yes. Here's proof. I could sign it for you, too, so you have the authority.
I might take you up.
I'm happy to be the bad guy, right? That's a good part of a therapist, is they can be the bad guy and tell kids things that, they could be mad at me about instead of you, right? Although I will warn you, if you guys ever try that, the kids will still blame you. Yeah. It just doesn't matter. I don't know why, but they will. Yeah. Unfortunately, though, that's probably your best route, is to sit with them, validate how hard it is, encourage them not to wallow in it, right? So that's where you gotta, at some point, set it aside and still live your life. Right. But yeah, that's hard. I'm really sorry. Yeah, it is what it is, yeah. Any other questions? So this other stuff gets into things if you can kind of control their environment a little bit. So a lot of this I was thinking, kind of if you get specific phobias or some conditioned responses, where you start setting up situations, or you give them hierarchical approaches. So you make them do something that's small and within their comfort zone, but causes a little bit of anxiety, but they can be successful at, and then you slowly expose them to harder and harder things to kind of build up that confidence. And it also builds up that skill usage. Because skills, when you start them, it's like riding a bike. At the very beginning, it's really hard to do, right? When you ride a bike, you fall down and you wobble around a little bit. So skill usage is the same way. So asking a kid to learn a skill and then use it on the very hardest, most anxiety-producing, stressful thing is pretty much setting them up to fail. So you want to, if you can, and you can't always, right? You can't always, but if you can, try to help them do it in small increments. You could teach them relaxation techniques, and as we probably all have smartphones, if you just, in your app store, if you type in relaxation techniques or mindfulness techniques, you will get a ton, right? And you can pick and choose. You can pick ones you want to pay for. You can pick the free ones. So there's even things that can walk you through. But the common relaxation techniques are breathing. So there's different ways you can focus on your breath. I love breathing because you can do it anywhere, and we already all know how to do it. You laugh. It makes it a lot easier. And other than one kid I had who really made a production out of breathing, nobody knows that you're doing it. So it's a skill that's inconspicuous, right? You can be working on your anxiety and nobody will know you're even doing it. Muscle relaxation is just teaching kids how to go through and purposely tense their body and then relax it. And when you relax your muscles, hopefully that counteracts that fight or flight response, and your body will relax and your mind will relax. So you can teach relaxation strategies like that. And then visualization. And this one you can use two different ways. The more traditional way is you imagine yourself in a relaxing place. So it can be very specific. So I had a kid once whose most relaxing place was his grandma's house, and I guess it was in a wooded area, and his grandma loved to bake. So that was his visualization scene. He was 11, he was so cute. And that was his thing. He would imagine himself going to grandma's house, and he would smell all the smells, and he would see all the sights, and he would see grandma there, and that would induce that relaxation response for him to help calm his anxiety. The other way you could do visualization is you could actually, this comes out of sports psychology, right? You can actually visualize yourself doing what it is you're nervous about doing. So if it's taking a test, if it's meeting a friend, if it's having to do a presentation, or if it's performing in band, you can actually just visualize yourself doing it. And I like to have my teens add the component of visualizing how you're going to cope with the anxiety. So the idea is to not pretend you're not going to have the anxiety. It's going to be there. So let's not deny it. Let's just, this is kind of that mindfulness idea of it's going to be there. Let's talk about what we're going to do with it. And so whatever their coping strategies are, you can have them lay it out for you. And then you actually just take them through that visualization of they're in there, they're getting nervous. what are they going to do? And then you just have them visualize themselves actually coping with the anxiety. And that does two things. One, it helps them remember what they're supposed to do once they get there in the moment. Two, it builds up confidence. It builds up confidence that they'll be able to do it. And then it also helps too because they're retraining their brain, they're practicing. Because even when we visualize things, our neurons are firing in that new pattern. So we can actually be retraining our brain even though we're not in the moment doing it. So it's a really helpful thing if you can get your kid to do it. Humor, I love humor. Use it with caution, right? Your kids might not think you're as funny as you think you are. I think humor works best if you really know your kid, you can use it. Or sometimes it's one of those things that you have to problem solve with your kid ahead of time so you know what's safe and what's not safe. Otherwise, you might just get yelled at. Reward systems. Sometimes our teens need a little encouragement, right, to build that confidence, especially skill building sets. You can give them rewards for doing what you want them to do. So you can use this with basic skills that are stressing the team out. So if they're really poor organizers, you can help them build organizational skills and use rewards to help them build that into their repertoire. But you can even do it with other skills. So if they're really anxious about going to a friend's house, you can use rewards every time they go to their friend's house and they stay there for an hour, and then you pick them up and you give them maybe they'll be really nice to you and all you have to do is give them a big hug, and they think that's a great reward. You could tell I have little kids, right? Because that stuff still works. Or maybe, you take them out for ice cream to say good job, or, small stuff. They don't need to go out and get a new car or anything like that. We encourage non-monetary stuff. I know that gets harder with teenagers. So you can do that, but then you up the ante, so you get the kid more regularly going out with some friends for short little things. Well, now maybe, we get them out doing, this is that hierarchical approach, right? You get them out doing something bigger where they have to stay longer with a friend. Or not only do they have to be with a friend but now they have to go out with the friends in public, which adds on a whole nother layer of anxiety for a lot of our kids. So you can help them build things with rewards. And then the collaborative problem solving that I keep mentioning. So collaborative problem solving is just kind of a medium between what most of us like to use. So there's plan A, which is please do as I say, or maybe you drop the please, just do what I say, and we use reinforcers, right? So if you pick that up, then you'll get your allowance. Like I said, I have little kids, so if they pick that up, they get lots of praise and hugs from mommy, and that still works. I have a feeling when they're 16 that's gonna go away. So that's a popular option, and that's a good option, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You will notice, if you haven't already, the older your kids get, the harder plan A gets. They don't want to be told. Some of that is just developmental. Teenagers, they're exercising their independence. Like I said, they're very egocentric, so everything revolves around them, and they also know everything, right? So they're going to get out there, they're going to change the world, they know what's going on, so mom and dad telling them what to do gets a lot harder. So what we don't want to do is flip all the way over to plan C, which means we remove all our expectations. And we say, okay, do whatever you want. Go for it. Stay up till 3:30 in the morning. Eat brownies for breakfast. I don't care if you go to school. You won't have any fights in your house anymore. But probably none of us want to go there. But again, plan C is actually a really good option sometimes. My mom will tell the story of my little brother. Me and my older brother, we were very much toe the line, fit nicely in the box kids. My little brother was not, so he was quite the surprise for my parents. And she said the best advice she ever got was to choose her battles. So if you guys haven't learned that one yet, that's a really good one. And that's plan C. That's how you use plan C effectively. So let's say your kid can't, I'm going to use this example. It doesn't mean it works for your family. It worked for my mom. Couldn't get my little brother to clean his room. It was a disaster. Bed was covered, whole floor was covered, clothes were just stacked on the bookshelves. You didn't know what was clean, what was dirty. When I say a disaster, I am not being catastrophic. It was really bad. So my mom came up with the idea. She did plan C, and she said, well, I'm not going to make you clean your room. You just have to have a clear path from the door to your bed and the bed to the window so I know you're safe. The rest is on you. It worked beautifully. And then my little smart little brother moved his bed right next to the window, so he only had to keep one path clear. Yeah, he really was a treat. So yeah, that's plan C. So plan C all the time doesn't work. Plan A all the time doesn't work. A lot of times the balance between the two works well enough. As kids get older, plan B tends to be really good, and that's that collaborative problem solving. And what's really nice, if you go to the website or grab a book out of the library and read about it, it'll talk about all of the executive functioning skills that are housed in our frontal lobe. It'll talk about all the skills that will help you develop in your child. So essentially what you're doing is you're coming right alongside with your kid, and you're helping them to learn how to think a little bit differently and a little bit better. And you solve the problem together. Sounds really easy, but you guys are probably like, no, that's not. I've tried that, right? It doesn't work. It works retrospectively, so if you have a problem and it went really poorly, you can always go back to it and say, okay, wow, let's talk about that. I didn't do very well, you didn't do very well. Let's figure out how we make sure that doesn't happen again. So you can use it retrospectively. You can also use it proactively. If you know something's gonna come and your kid's gonna be really super stressed out and you know it's gonna be a problem, you can sit down before it even happens and try to do this with your teen. So simplified, like I said, I'm not spending tons of time here. First step is empathy and reassurance. Then you define the problem, and then you solve the problem together. Step one is the only one I'm gonna go over because it's actually the hardest. People hear empathy and listening, and they're like, got it, no problem, I can do that. And actually, it's the step that parents screw up most of the time. It's the hardest step. So what you do is you just use reflective listening. So you ask questions, you summarize, you ask them what they're feeling like, you maybe guess what they're feeling. So, are you saying you're kind of really nervous about this? Or what did you think about it when she said that to you? That would have hurt my feelings. Did that hurt your feelings? Your whole focus is on them. And where parents screw up is either they think they've done a good job at this and they move on too soon to the problem-solving stage. So they nod a couple times, they say, yep, I get it, and then they move on, and the kid's like, no, you don't. You don't get me at all. So then you just gotta go back and you gotta keep listening some more. Or the parents try to tell their kid what they're thinking. So then the kid's feeling like you're not validating them. They're like, oh, mom's already on to telling me why she's right and I'm wrong, and you're gonna lose the kid right there. So step one is actually the hardest. You don't tell them what you're thinking. You don't tell them why their thinking is crazy and off the wall and catastrophic and makes absolutely no sense. You just listen and you validate. And when you do that long enough, what should happen, unless your kid is really being oppositional and defiant, they should lower their defenses. And once you've done that, you can say, well, this is my concern, and then you guys can hopefully come together and solve the problem in a way that works for both of you, right? So like I said, it can be very hard. I've done role plays with it where I just kind of, my boss made me do it once with him, and he was the oppositional kid, and I just stopped at one point because I was like, I don't know what else to do. So it's very, very hard sometimes. It's very powerful, and I will tell you it works very well with adults too. I have a lot of adults come in my office, they're like, what do I have to do with my kid? And I'm like, this is exactly what I do with you, right? I sit here and I smile and I validate what you're feeling and what you're thinking, and then when I know you feel like I get you and I understand you, and hopefully I do, that's when I come in and I introduce other ways of thinking and other ways of responding. So it works really well with adults too. The idea is, though, that you don't solve the kid's problem, that you do it together. You get the kid to generate as many responses. You can too, right? And sometimes you generate responses that maybe are really off the wall. You get that humor going, but hopefully the kid is starting to retrain his way of thinking and thinking of some different things. All right, so I'm probably almost out of time anyway here. Oh, yeah. So just a few final things for you to remember. Emotional pain won't hurt you. I guess I should say physically. It's incredibly uncomfortable. I think we've maybe all been there where we feel like really we can't do it, right? It's so scary that we're almost paralyzed. But really, physically, it's not going to do anything to us unless we keep doing all the avoidance things that will perpetuate it. So really what happens is when we start to avoid things and cope with things in unhelpful ways, that's when you can really start causing yourself both emotional and physical pain. So this is what I was saying earlier. Learning how to sit with pain is really important. It's important for us as adults, and it's important for us to be teaching our kids. It's just a lifelong skill that we want our kids to have. And the research, interestingly enough, depending on what you read, it's either 45 to 90 seconds. So when we experience our emotion, that's just a neuron firing in our brain, right? Just like pain is. The neuron fires in our brain tells us where in our body we should feel pain. Same with the emotion. So if we could leave that alone, if that neuron fired, triggered that emotional response, if we could leave that alone, meaning we don't think anything that's anxious or we don't do anything in response to that anxiety, that single emotion will last 45 to 90 seconds. That's it. Now, how many of us can do that? Yeah, I can. I really can. But isn't that fascinating, right? If we were good enough to just leave our brain alone and not respond so quickly to that emotional response, we could just outride it really fast. So I bring that up, one, because I think it's fascinating, and two, because it tells you how much we create our own suffering, right, by how we think and what we do. So the more we can retrain our brains to respond differently, maybe we'll never reach that 90 seconds, but maybe we can bring down the hour to 10 minutes. That sounds a lot better to me right there. Or maybe we bring down the 6 months. You know, some people come and they've been suffering for 6 months, they've been suffering for years. Maybe we can bring that down so their suffering lasts, when they get anxious, a half an hour. And for them, that's a blessing, right, after what they've been doing. So if we keep working at it, we can really make a difference and really bring that response down. So I think there was, if I'm correct, Pam, did you do the presentation on the 40 developmental assets this year?
I've done a lot of presentations.
Yeah. So I just threw that in because I don't know if any of you guys have seen this presentation already, but what's presented in there just ties right into everything I was saying here. So I won't spend time on it, but those 40 developmental assets, if you know what they are, if you foster those in your kids, it will help them build resiliency against stress and anxiety. So all the stuff, I went down the list when I did this last year, and I was like, yep, check, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good. So if you're looking for other things to help develop in your kids that aren't necessarily specific techniques for anxiety and stress, just developing and fostering those things are good. It's also important to know that if your kid's not developing in one of those areas, it could be because anxiety is just impeding their development. So then you gotta, they kind of interact, and you gotta pave the way for them to get the anxiety out of the way. And then everybody wants to know, at what point should I get outside help? For me, functioning is probably the number one thing. At the point where stress and anxiety is so severe, the teen isn't functioning as well as they really should be, then you might want to think about calling in somebody else to give you some help. Maybe it's not that bad yet, but anything you're doing at home isn't sufficiently working. I have a kid like that. He will never listen to anything I say. I tell him, just breathe, right? And he's like, Mom, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, yeah. So he'll be one if his anxiety progresses. I've already got him booked at my clinic, right? So if home interventions do not work, so that either because the kid won't do it with you, which is the third one. So some of us, we just have kids who they'll do it with anybody else but us, right? And that's okay. Sometimes that's just what you do. And whether it's with a professional, or maybe they have a mentor or a family friend, or teachers, you guys are really therapists in disguise, right? Yeah. So they have a teacher. Sometimes teachers are good resources. So sometimes just finding somebody else for them to connect with. And then, of course, if you've tried everything you know how to do, you've done all the self-help books, you've been to all the presentations, and everything you've tried and the teen has tried just isn't working, it might be time to get some other ideas. So if you go and get treatment, I won't go through this. Oh, I did put mindfulness in there finally. Generally for anxiety, the things you want to look for, number one is rapport. If your kid doesn't like the therapist, you might as well switch right there, because I will tell you the therapy will fail. If you don't like the therapist, unless the kid is really attached to that therapist, which most kids aren't, you might want to get a different therapist. Because if you don't trust the therapist or like them, or your kid doesn't, it's just not going to work. You need to feel like, you know, your therapist knows what they're doing, that they get it, that they understand. And it doesn't matter why. You know, when I first started, people didn't want to see me because they thought I was too young. They didn't think I'd have enough life experience. That's fine. Some people don't want to talk to me because I'm not a man. Some people don't want to talk to men because they're not a woman. So whatever their reason is, whatever your reason is, your kid's reason is, that's fine. Rapport is just very important. So don't skip it. And then you're going to want to look for cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what I talked about today. Family therapy is often needed for the reason I said earlier, that most of the time if you have an anxious teen, probably mom or dad is also going to have at least a little bit of anxiety. So sometimes you need some family therapy to pull out those dynamics and help the parents. And sometimes the anxiety is severe enough in the parent that, you know, they really should be getting into their own treatment themselves. And then mindfulness is a newer one, but it's having really good results. And some of you maybe, I know they've been doing programs in the schools, so some of you may have already heard this or seen some of this come through with your kids. And then the last is just, I pulled up a bunch of books. Like I said, you can Google this stuff and you'll get, you know, the sky's the limit on this, but I pulled up some things that I thought looked good if you guys wanted to consult other resources. So that's all I have. Questions, comments?
One of your slides, I think, referred to OCD.
Yes.
I was curious whether you thought that OCD was a source of anxiety and stress, or whether it's a result of anxiety and stress.
Both. Sometimes OCD will get triggered by general stress and anxiety. A lot of times what I will see is they've always had, I call them quirks. So little type OCD things that are kind of there, but they're not interfering with functioning. They're not a big deal. If the kid really wanted to, they could probably not do it. So you know, you don't really think anything of it. But then stress builds or other things happen, and that makes this OCD suddenly skyrocket. And suddenly what was just little things that they tended to do were now things they had to do, and it becomes debilitating. And then that's the hallmark of OCD, right? If they don't do what the OCD tells them to do, they experience a lot of anxiety.
So are there special treatment practices, whatever, to try to address that?
For OCD, well, there's two components to treatment for OCD. There's all the skill sets that I presented tonight of teaching them how to manage their anxious thoughts and feelings. And then combined with that, they want to do, it's called exposure with response prevention, ERP. So what you do, it sounds really cruel, and my heart goes out to people who have to do this. You expose them to what provokes the anxiety, and you teach them not to do the compulsion with it. So if it's, let's say it's a checking behavior where they have to check a lock 10 times, what you would do is you would have them go and you'd have them lock the lock, and then you wouldn't let them do it again, and they'd get very anxious, and you have them ride out that anxiety. It does go down. It does go down. You have them use all those skills to ride that anxiety out until it goes down, and then you have them do it again. You have them check the lock. It'll spike their anxiety right up again. You don't let them check it again, and you make them ride it down using good skills and countering the anxiety. It'll go down, and what you're doing is you're retraining your brain to learn that the anxiety will go away whether you check that lock or not. So you're retraining that that reinforcement pattern that your brain has developed. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's OCD is another one that we treat really well, and that's kind of the number one intervention for it. But it's really hard on the family, and it's really hard on the kid. So, yeah.
How do you coach your child through the 90-second rule, or say the anxiety with the pull-off? What do you say to them while they're anxious?
It depends on your kid. So what you could do with your kid is probably similar to what I would do with a client. So we would talk about different ways that you could, I call them tools in your tool belt. So you kind of show them the different ways you could do it, and then you ask them what works for you. So maybe I've had clients who they like the thought challenging, and we talk about what their OCD story is. So what does that OCD script tell you? All right, well, how do we challenge that? What do we know is true? and you have them repeat the new script to them. I have other kids who would do better with just having me talk the breathe. If you do breathing, just go through a breathing exercise with them and just coach them through breathing. I have other people who like to do a variety of different things. So I would sit down with your child and talk it out with them and find out if they can tell you. Otherwise, it's kind of a trial and error for you, where you try different things and see if you can figure out what will work, because everybody's different. So probably not the response you were hoping for, right?
So that when they're sitting with the pain, is that the same as the OCD?
Yep. So the sitting, if they're just anxious, it's not OCD, that's the same thing. The anxiety is the pain, and you want them to just sit with it and realize that if they don't fuel it, that 90-second rule, if they stop fueling it, it does go away. Sometimes it takes a while though, and it's hard.
And I think, like, as a kid, I had OCD stuff, and you don't realize that that's what it is. You just think that that's how, what you're supposed to do to.
Yeah.
And even if people, even if my siblings used to be like, oh my gosh, stop it, But it didn't matter, because it was just like the way that my brain functioned. And so I could see if you would do something like that, it would take some time to even recognize that isn't even an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and anxiety too, just in general. A lot of the adults I work with, they'll come into my office and you could just see the anxiety just kind of oozing out of them. They're so anxious. But they don't even realize that they're that anxious. It's just how they've always been. It's how they've always done things. And it's a real eye-opener for them to discover that there's a different way of living, right? Same with the OCD, when you realize, oh, not everybody does that. I don't have to do this. Yeah.
Is there anything you can share in helping us address worry and anxiety in regards to the recent events, the event in Florida at the high school and our recent lockdown situation? We're dealing with our own concerns at the same time, but what can we do to help them work through that?
That's probably another combination of accepting that this is just kind of a reality that our kids have to live with, and then making a choice between, do they want to worry about it, and then you could do some of the thought challenging there, where it's like, okay, I know this happens, but let's think, how likely is it to happen? And that's a hard one, right? Because it seems with our media that it's just happening all the time. But if you really sat down and thought about how many schools there are all over the country, by the time you do elementary, middle, and high school, and then colleges, the percentage is still technically probably really low. So you can do a little bit of that thought challenging about how likely is it to happen. And then it comes down to going back to that choice of, okay, it could happen. I can't tell somebody it couldn't, right? That'd be a lie, and that's not going to help. So you give them a choice. You can worry about it and think about what's going to happen all the time, and what's the cost to that, right? So if we sit here and worry about anything all the time, what is the cost? Miss out on friends, miss out on fun times, miss out on experiences. And so sometimes that's what helps, is helping them to see that the worry, even if it's true, even if there is something to worry about, it just doesn't help, and you're going to miss out on your life worrying about something that may or may not ever happen. So again, it's that combination of sitting with the pain of something that's just a reality for us, but then helping them to manage those worries and maybe let them go, and accepting that it's out of their control, right? And none of us like that. We want to be in control. Does that help, kind of? Okay, yep. Anything else? All right, well, thank you guys all for coming tonight. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, I guess you can let me know. I think my information's on the sheet there, so thank you very much.